government may soon decide on relaxing mandatory sourcing of solar modules from the approved list of domestic manufacturers. The Ministry of Renewable Energy is going to take a decision, and they're going to take it on the basis of investigation report that they are going to conduct on the surge in pricing and the shortage of solar modules in the domestic market. In fact, here at ET Now, we've learned from our sources that the decision regarding this may be taken next week itself. My colleague Prakash has been looking into this story, and he's filed this report earlier today.
See, we are getting from our sources that the government may take decision on relaxation in mandatory procurement of solar module norms very soon. Relaxation may be given to solar project developers in mandatory procurement of solar modules from approved list of domestic manufacturers. Sources are informing that the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy may take decision by next week. Minister of Power and New and Renewable Energy has directed concerned department to take decision in next 4 or 5 days. Government may provide relaxation in procurement norms, if it finds shortage of solar modules in domestic market. As you are aware that under current norms, solar project developers have to procure solar modules from approved list of modules and manufacturers. Solar project developers can procure solar modules from anywhere, including China, once it gets relaxation. Sources are also informing that the investigation report on demand and supply situation of solar modules in domestic market in final stage. Government has held separate meeting with solar project developers and manufacturers, and issue related to a surge in solar module prices are also being examined. Industry has informed government that the project of approx 25,000 megawatt may get delayed due to supply constraint.
Fair enough. Now, in a major boost to the Make in India initiative, Swedish defense manufacturer Saab has announced that they are going to be setting up a manufacturing plant in India. That facility is being set up for the Staff M4 weapon system. In fact, Saab has also announced it's going to be partnering with Indian suppliers and manufacturers. This is going to be one of the first Make in India projects that will supply to the world. My colleague Shinjoy Chaudhary had a chance to speak to the head of Saab's business area dynamics. Listen in to what he's told us.
We would like to support the customer in India, but of course if we set up a production facility, that it will be possible also for other parts of the world among our customer base.
And what product are you putting out initially for India and for the Indian Army?
The focus is the M4 system and the new sighting system.
And when is it going to be ready?
The first product will go out 2024 from the factory.
All right, so that's what we got from the management of Saab. Meanwhile, talking about Indian manufacturing and, of course, a lot of the kind of manufacturing that we could have in the future is actually with China. So can that move happen? Well, Gautam Adani has a word to say about this. He says China is going to feel increasingly isolated because there is rising nationalism over there. He talks about a shift in supply chains and technology restrictions, which threaten the world's second biggest economy. And this is happening even as giants like Apple and Saab have announced manufacturing plans in India. So, of course, the big question is, can India beat China as the manufacturer of the world? Let's open this up by way of a discussion. M S Unnikrishnan, industry veteran, is joining us. Also, our consulting editor, economist Mythili Bhusnurmath is with us. And Anil Trigunayat is the former ambassador who's also with us tonight. Mr. Unnikrishnan, coming to you first. Now, Apple has started manufacturing the iPhone 14 in India. We're hearing about Saab's plans as well. I mean, do you see these as signs of several companies looking away from China as a manufacturing hub today? And I want to know from you why you think India stands. I mean, where does it stand exactly when these companies are looking for options outside China, considering the Western world's conflict today, the conflict with China and the multiple Chinese pandemic-induced lockdowns that have disrupted economic activity there. So the time seems to be right, but how is India poised to take that on?
Well, India recognized it, in fact, even before the pandemic starting.
Yes.
And if you had heard about it, we discussed multiple times on this multiple forums that China plus one policy. It's not that everything is going to move out of China into India. China plus one policy, which is going to be adopted by the global multinationals and the leading manufacturers of the world. India had, incidentally, we worked very hard on getting our ease of doing business well within control. Substantial improvement has happened from 3-digit to double-digit. The number may be around 60s. I don't know the latest number, but 65, 66 kind of a thing. A lot of reforms done in labor area. It is already passed by the parliament. 44 of our labor laws got subsumed into 4 labor codes, and it is many of them have already started getting implemented in the country. We opened up a market in multiple areas where almost 100% FDI is allowed. In majority of the areas, we have removed the controls of international companies coming in and setting up capacities over here. And I would say that the markets have opened up beyond only equity into a bond market and insurance market, which is needed to support capacity building is going to be happening at this juncture. Why would India win? I'm not trying to say India will be the only destination. For the global manufacturers, the people who are wanting capacity creation, there are a lot of attractions for India. What are those attractions? Number one, we are a democracy. Whatever said and done, anybody may complain anything about India, but we are an open democracy with a lot of freedom available. A government change happens every 5 years. So this is number one. So the global multinationals are looking forward to a country with this kind of a system. Number one. Number two, the political stability that we've been seeing in the country. I'm not talking about the last 8 years alone. Political stability is there in the country for almost, I would say, 1991 onwards. So it is a substantially positive indicator for people to come to India. And the next item is the manpower of India. I mean, if we are today, I don't know whether people have spoken about, there are 80 lakh students doing engineering, degree, masters and PhD at various universities. And they are some of the finest of the intellectual capital that anybody can dream of. America doesn't have it, even China doesn't have it. I can vouch for it. Having operated a company in China for almost maybe 10 years, I can say that our intellectual capital is far, far ahead.
Certainly.
Yeah, we have a bureaucracy also. States are competing with each other to ensure that any investment coming in is going from state to state. So
and there is healthy competition on that front as well. So, yeah. Mr. Trigunayat, I mean, analysts are anticipating that by the year 2025, Apple may produce 1 in every 4 iPhones in India. And that's a huge thing in terms of the preparedness that India has in offering ease of doing business, in political willingness to open up to foreign players, in marketing ourselves to the world against competitors like Vietnam, for example. How well are we doing right now?
Vikram, Mr. Unnikrishnan has brought out a lot of positives. And on that note, there is no doubt that we received the highest ever FDI despite the pandemic and despite the problem. That is also an indicator of the global confidence into India. But the fact remains is that the countries wanting to move away from China, some of the major companies, but many of them have adopted the 1+1 model. So when they are looking outside China, they're looking in addition rather than completely moving out. And we have seen a very large number of companies who left in this manner. Only 7 looked at India out of that. Now, Apple is a very major game. Samsung is here in a very big way. So we have to continue to up our doing business with India index, the red carpet that Prime Minister often talks about instead of the red tape. It needs to be built upon. There are still, in the minds of the people, there are always something that your legal system takes much longer to clear. Of course, in China, there's no legal system at all. But then we have to, as a democracy, we provide a level playing field for everyone. India's states are competing, that is a fact. But at the same time, I feel that we perhaps need to do more. Whenever everybody tells me that we have improved our ranking to 63 or 53, whatever, yes, I always say, my friends, that means we have 52 more steps to climb.
Yes.
Now, because see, the FDI or the capital, the technology, all these are limited and there are too many takers for it.
Sure.
And there is increasing competition. Yes. Now, Vietnam has done significantly well. Most of the companies that are coming out of China have looked at either back home or because of the incentives given by their governments, or for that matter in Vietnam or ASEAN countries.
Right.
Because there they can relate much more easier because the existing value of supply chains. So and India has to become an integral part of these.
Yes, and very importantly, like you said, Mr. Trigunayat, I mean, it's always seems like, for the moment, it's always a +1 over what they have going already. So that's where India is currently poised. But Mythili, to weigh in on this, currently manufacturing accounts for about 15% of the country's GDP. I want to know from you why India has traditionally fallen behind the curve when it comes to manufacturing as a developing nation, and how have you seen the contribution of the manufacturing sector change over the years in the Indian growth story in recent times?
Unfortunately, Vikram, this has been one of the tragedies. I think that we've really not been able to increase the share of manufacturing in India's GDP. Successive governments have tried and tried very hard. But the fact is, I think we all know that there are issues about ease of doing business in India. We might have moved up the rankings, but on paper, something like enforcement of contract, which is very fundamental to any commercial transaction, we are somewhere at the bottom. So one really cannot expect. We might want to talk of China +1, etc., and the fact that yes, we did receive substantial amount of FDI despite COVID times, but there's really no comparison between China and India. If you look at China, China is #1 in terms of GDP, in terms of PPP. We are #5, and that too we got here with a great deal of difficulty. In terms of GDP overall, China's overall GDP is about 18 trillion. We are just barely about 3 trillion. So they're huge. I'm talking in dollars. So there is no real comparison between India and China. Yes, China started on the economic reform process much before we did in the late 70s. And they made substantial progress, close to 10% growth for so many years. In fact, the World Bank says this is the single largest economy which has sustained economic progress at such a high level. Whereas we have had our ups and downs. And part of the reason, I would believe, in fact, a very substantial part of the reason, is because of our different political systems. And now, perhaps, partly because of that, we are seeing that the World Bank's latest estimates show that China's economic growth is slowing down to below that of its East Asia and Pacific neighbors. In fact, for the first time in more than 30 years, World Bank estimates that China will grow substantially slower than the rest of the region. 2.8% is the World Bank's estimate, as compared to 5.3% for the rest of Asia Pacific. Now, this is a significant slowdown for the Chinese economy. Whether we can cash in on that opportunity is a big question mark. Well, is the reason entirely because of the political systems? Not really. I think we do need to do much more to make it easier to do business on the ground, not just on a paper.
Well, Mr. Unnikrishnan, do come in on this, because Mr. Adani, for one, believes that nationalism really helps the Indian cause. Surely it helps many companies that India has a thriving domestic market for consumption of products that are made here. It perhaps makes better sense for these companies to set up manufacturing bases here, besides using it as an export base for the Asian region in particular. But when Mr. Adani speaks about the growing nationalism in the country, do you think that could also be a helping hand for the growth of India's manufacturing base?
Absolutely right. Because we had trade deficit for eons. But somebody spoke about Atmanirbhar. And today, possibly, a person on the street is aware of the fact that we are importing a lot more than what we are exporting. That understanding has already come in. And I would also say that India is going to be the largest market for majority of the items in the world. China's consumption is slowing down, whereas India's consumption is going to go up. But whatever we may say, I agree with both Anil as well as maybe Mythili, my friend. But only thing you need to recognize is that we are still at $2,500 per capita country. So unless otherwise we are able to generate wealth a lot more, we will not be able to distribute wealth. If you are able to create wealth, distributed consumption will go up. So it's a cyclical issue. We have had a past baggage available in number of things, democracy versus, the kind of rule that prevails in those kind of places. And we love our freedom and independence and freedom, the kind of democracy. So we'll be slower than them. But I'm not entirely worried about that. We lost out maybe, I would say, a few decades, because they started it in 1979 when Deng Xiaoping started the entire kind of, real master plan made how they're going to be developing China. We have sufficiently fluid master plan available. We will develop. But there are constraints for us. All what my colleagues spoke about, I fully agree with them. Yeah. I'm not disagreeing on that count. However, we should be very clear about the fact that we are on the path. Even when you spoke about the number of companies who came to India, remember, China started getting international companies only possibly post 1990. The bigger ones came in there. Whereas majority of the multinationals are already there in India. If you talk about the existing MNCs in India, starting with Unilever onwards, in the FMCG area to engineering companies like GE, Siemens equivalent, who are there in the country for 70, 80 years, all of them are also investing in the country. It is not treated as a separate FDI or a new name coming to India. So that we need to be taking a factor of.
Yes.
And next one is, see, I fully agree that Vietnam, possibly Thailand, or maybe Southeast Asian countries are also going to be attracting Thailand. They will attract. But is there a market as big as India available? End of the day, any organization in the world.
That's the point that we were getting at, absolutely. And that is the growth potential, as it were. When companies are looking at options right now, they look at the size and scale of the Indian market, and that in itself becomes a huge positive. Besides, of course, India has been trying to offer these lucrative subsidies through its PLI program, the production-linked incentives, and all of which, over a period of time, should yield the kind of results that the government would be hoping for in times to come. And that's a track that we are monitoring very closely. Thanks very much for joining us with your perspective on this. We will continue the discussion and keep watching that space for more action from the Indian side. Thanks indeed for joining us tonight.